Hello and welcome to The Drum. I'm Steve Kinane. Coming up, a cattle producer gives us her view on the resumption of live animal exports. Should think tanks declare where their money comes from? And it's worked for Portugal. Is it time to decriminalise drug use here? Our panel tonight, Chaz Licciardello from The Chaser, Tim Wilson from the Institute of Public Affairs, and in Canberra, Simon Banks from Hawker Britain. First, the ban on live animal exports to Indonesia has been lifted to the relief of the cattle industry. Agriculture Minister Joe Ludwig says safeguards are now in place to ensure the welfare of Australian animals.
A number of key conditions for resumption have been met. This includes agreement within industry about how international standards would be operationalised, confidence that a number of exporters in Australia are ready to meet these standards, and advice that Indonesia is prepared to issue import permits for importation of live cattle.
But not everyone is happy. The Greens and Independents are warning they'll continue to push for a complete ban on live cattle exports.
I think the government has succeeded in making everyone unhappy. There are still outstanding issues of animal welfare. Andrew Wilkie and I will still be persisting in our bills to ensure that this trade is phased out within 3 years, but in the meantime there are a number of urgent issues that need to be addressed.
I call on the Prime Minister that she allows a conscience vote when this bill comes into the House of Representatives and into the Senate in August, I believe. I think that's the best way to address this now. There are clearly many members of the government, many members of the opposition who share Nick's view, my view, the view of Animals Australia and RSPCA, that proper safeguards must be put in place before we resume this trade.
And late this afternoon, some Labor backbenchers held a news conference raising their concerns about the resumption of the live export trade unless the stunning of animals was guaranteed.
We'll be pushing for stunning to become part of the situation for all cattle which are being exported from Australia to Indonesia, and we will also be pushing for an appropriate role for the animal protection groups in monitoring what happens in Indonesia.
The decision came as the Foreign Minister prepared to leave for Indonesia for emergency talks on the issue, and he seemed a bit surprised.
Agriculture Minister Joe Ludwig has been hard at work for a long time, and we don't necessarily talk about what we do every day. Joe's been very busy. He's copped a lot of criticism. Craig, the Trade Minister, has been pretty busy. I've done a bit of paddling under the water as well. So this is an important announcement by Joe.
And National Senator Barnaby Joyce targeted the government's approach.
You know, the Labor Party are going to be dancing around the place today saying what a wonderful thing it is that they've cleaned up half their own mess. Well, they created the mess and they're responsible for it. They should have never created the mess in the first place. Who's talking to who in that show? How does it actually work? Is it so dysfunctional now that even the Foreign Minister and the Minister for Agriculture and the Prime Minister are sort of in, you know, some sort of form of non-communication, that they're sort of like Trappist monks and they don't talk to one another anymore?
Just in regards to...
Trappist monks, not Trappist monks.
Simon, Labor seems a bit split and a bit confused on this issue. 9 backbenchers are not happy with the decision, and the Foreign Minister seemed surprised when he heard of the announcement just before he got on a plane to Indonesia.
Well, I think there are a range of views across the Labor Party, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But I think we really need to go back to the basis of what this problem was. The reason why we're in this situation is because Meat and Livestock Australia did not do the job that it told the Australian government, the Australian people, and indeed its own members, the cattle producers that it supposedly represents. It didn't actually tell them the truth about what conditions were going on inside Indonesia, and that's what we saw with the Four Corners program. What the government's done, I think, today is actually a very important move forward. We now have, I think what the government's trying to do is guarantee that it can guarantee that the supply of cattle to Indonesia, that there are in fact mechanisms in place that now exporters can comply with in order to guarantee that cattle only go into the appropriate abattoirs in Indonesia. And it's now going to be up to individual exporters to be able to demonstrate that they can do the right thing. And that's a very important step forward.
Tim, what's your reaction to the announcement?
Well,
Well, I can't believe I'm saying this. I agree with Barnaby Joyce on this. The government's cleaning up their own mess. It's a big Band-Aid solution to a problem they created themselves. The problem was they took too much of an emotional reaction initially to the Four Corners program after a huge amount of feedback from the public, when what was always required was a sensible public policy, rational response. And they went too far by banning entirely, and now they're having to open up a bit. There was always going to be a need to maintain some sort of industry, an export industry of live cattle. It was about making sure it was done properly, and a blanket ban from the start was stupid. They should have phased something in based on meeting the ethical objectives that the country wants.
And Chaz, they don't seem to have pleased anyone with this announcement. The graziers or the animal activists, neither are happy.
No, they've kind of gone too much one way, then too much the other way. They're like a footy umpire. Now everyone says they're a white maggot, essentially. So they haven't done very well. In fact, I found quite interesting that clip you played from Kevin Rudd before, talking about paddling under the water. He's actually comparing Labor politicians to sitting ducks, which I think is quite appropriate. Look, it's you can't believe, Tim, that you're agreeing with Barnaby Joyce. I can't believe I'm agreeing with Bob Katter. About 3 weeks ago, Bob Katter I thought he had a very sensible policy where he said, look, it's all about stunning when it comes down to it, whether you stun the animals or not. So why not just keep the slaughterhouses in Indonesia that do stun, which some Australian companies do stun over there, keep them going, and send stun guns to the rest. If you want to stop them slaughtering cows cruelly, then just give them the tools and they won't. I thought that was quite sensible.
Well, joining us now is Kelly White, who's a cattle producer from the Bridge Creek station south of Darwin. Kelly, welcome.
Hi, how are you going?
Thanks for talking to us. Tell us, what's your reaction to the announcement today?
Oh, we were ecstatic. I mean, to open the trade up, at least we can still be involved in our market.
OK, so they've opened the trade up, but what does that mean for you personally?
Well, it just gives us some certainty that at Christmas time, which is when we sell our young cattle, that we'll have somewhere to sell them to.
Kelly, how long before you'll actually be able to export your cattle to Indonesia?
They're talking the end of August will be when the first boat goes out of Darwin, so let's hope that that's a bit sooner.
So if it's the end of August, how much money is that going to cost you?
Well, for us, it hopefully won't cost us anything because our cattle had already gone before they'd suspended the trade. But for producers who weren't able to sell, it will depend on the price we're offered by Indonesia, and they're talking that will be halved, so it will cost them a lot of money.
We've heard that some people might have to kill some of their cattle. Are you in that kind of situation?
Look, not this year, not before Christmas, but if this goes on into, say, next dry season, then, yeah, we would probably be in the same boat where we'd have to cull.
And have you spoken to fellow graziers who've said similar things, that they might have to cull?
Everyone's in the... I mean, anyone that wasn't able to sell cattle is in the same boat. I mean, your paddocks are only big enough to run so many head, and when they can't go off farm, you can't let them all starve to death or die of thirst. So, you know, what other options do they have?
Kelly, there's animal activists and there's also Labor backbenchers who didn't want the ban on live exports lifted until you could guarantee that Australian standards were operating in all the abattoirs in Indonesia. What would you say to them?
Look, I just seriously don't think that's practical. I mean, after producers in the territory viewed the footage that Four Corners aired, I mean, everyone was the agreeance that we'd only send cattle to abattoirs that were to Australian standards. So, I mean, even before this suspension, cattle producers were quite prepared to do that. But that was all taken out of our hands when the federal government suspended the trade.
Kelly, you and other cattle producers concerned that this may damage long-term trade with Indonesia?
Oh, definitely. I think it was one of the rudest things Australia's ever done. I mean, they didn't consult industry, they didn't consult Indonesia, they didn't even consult the state premiers that they were going to suspend the trade. So, I mean, I think Indonesia has every right to be upset.
And just finally, how have MLA come out of all of that, and how will their relationship be with cattle producers such as yourself?
Well, I mean, I can only talk personally, but I'm not very happy with the situation. I pay $5 a head to MLA every time I sell an animal, and to me, they haven't been doing their job, and which has put producers in a bad light.
Kelly White, thanks very much for talking to us from Darwin there.
No worries.
Look,
Chaz?
Thank you very much.
I'm not a psychologist, but just a point of order, I'm pretty sure that Kelly wasn't ecstatic. Even though she said she was. Just reading between the lines, I don't think she was ecstatic.
Tim, do you think this could harm the relationship with Indonesia?
Undoubtedly, because these sorts of relationships build over time and it doesn't take much to smash them, particularly in a country like Indonesia. If anybody who's worked in Asia knows, these relationships take a long time to build up and they're as much people to people as they are built on solid foundations and trust. And the erratic behaviour, and it's not just this issue of this current government, in lots of policy areas is burning investors, it's burning foreign governments, and it's not in any individual event, it's the pattern of events that's starting to really make it problematic.
Simon, what do you think about the implications for the long-term relationship with Indonesia?
Well, I think if MLA had done its job properly in the first place, we wouldn't be in this situation. I think we have to be perfectly honest. And I don't think it was acceptable to keep this trade going when there was no guarantee that Australian cattle were going to be in appropriate conditions. And you even heard that from Kelly herself. I mean, she was not interested at all in exporting her cattle to Indonesia unless they were going to be treated properly. The government's gone through the mechanisms now. It's made sure that there's supply chain assurance. It's reached an agreement with Indonesia about that. And now exporters can, get on and doing business, but also doing business properly. And I think that's an appropriate outcome.
Quick point from you, Chaz, and we'll move on.
Yeah, what I hope, Steve, is what happens now is that we don't just all move away, now the story's over, and just forget about it. Because what should have happened from the beginning is that we should have held the MLA accountable for proper standards, and even the international standards are not the standards of Australia. And we should keep on pushing, not by sanctions or anything, but over the next few years, just gradually work the standards up.
I think the fortunate thing is that if any sort of media event occurs like the one like Four Corners had, MLA is going to get absolutely chastised because there's no way they can fly under the radar now. They have a lot of responsibility. The government has some responsibility, but most of it is on MLA.
They are on the radar like they have never been.
They're not going to be able to avoid it, I think.
Yeah. Well, the carbon tax isn't officially unveiled until Sunday, but as more details leak each day, there might not be much left to reveal. Fairfax papers are reporting today the starting price will be $23 a tonne, and the government has confirmed only 500 of Australia's carbon-emitting companies will be forced to cough up. That's despite previously saying